The ink on the divorce papers was the only thing louder than the silence in the penthouse. A stark black signature ending 10 years of marriage without a single shout. He didn't leave a note, only her wedding ring placed precisely in the center of the marble island, right next to the phone she had forgotten to lock. The screen still glowing with a message from another man. It wasn't the betrayal that broke him. It was the realization that he had become invisible in his own home long before he decided to vanish. If you find yourself drawn to stories about the quiet dignity of walking away and the shattering echo of realized mistakes, stay with me, because we are just opening the door. The notification light on the phone pulsed with a soft, rhythmic blue, syncing perfectly with the heavy rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Tribeca penthouse. It was 3:14 a.m. Lucas Bennett stood in the center of the living room, a space he had designed but never truly inhabited. The room was a testament to Elena's taste. Stark white sofas, abstract sculptures that looked like jagged wounds, and cold, polished concrete floors. He held a tumbler of scotch, neat, but he hadn't taken a sip in 20 minutes. He was simply watching the phone on the kitchen island. Can't wait for him to sleep. I need you. The message had flashed across the lock screen 2 hours ago. Elena hadn't even bothered to turn the phone face down. She was asleep in the master bedroom, the door slightly ajar. Lucas could hear the faint, steady sound of her breathing. It was a sound that used to anchor him, used to make him feel safe. Now, it just sounded like a clock ticking down to 0. He walked over to the island, his socks silent on the cold floor. He placed the scotch glass on a coaster, old habits died hard, and looked at the divorce papers spread out before him. He had prepared them weeks ago, carried them in his briefcase like a loaded gun he was afraid to fire. But tonight, the fear was gone. It had been replaced by a numbness that felt strangely like clarity. He uncapped his fountain pen. The scratch of the nib against the paper was the loudest sound in the world. Lucas Andrew Bennett. He didn't shake. He didn't cry. He looked at the signature and felt the sudden, terrifying weightlessness of a man who had just cut his parachute cord. Lucas moved to the hallway closet. He bypassed the expensive suits Elena liked him to wear to her gallery openings, the ones that made him feel like a prop, and reached for his old leather duffel bag. He packed with military precision. 3 days of clothes, his passport, his laptop, and the drafting sketchbook he hadn't opened in a year. He walked back to the bedroom doorway one last time. The city lights cast a pale glow across Elena's face. She looked innocent in sleep, her dark hair fanned out across the silk pillowcase. She was beautiful, undeniably so. That beauty had been the currency she used to buy his compliance for a decade. She thought he was weak. She thought he was the safe harbor she could dock at when the storms of her exciting, chaotic life became too much. She was wrong. He wasn't the harbor. He was the erosion happening beneath the waterline. He returned to the kitchen island. He slipped the gold band off his left ring finger. It left a pale indentation of skin, a ghost of the commitment he was leaving behind. He placed the ring directly on top of the divorce papers, weighing them down. He picked up her phone, the screen dark now, and placed it next to the ring. He didn't write a note. A note would imply there was something left to discuss, an emotion left to negotiate. There wasn't. Silence was the only language she had left him. Lucas put on his coat, picked up the duffel bag, and walked to the front door. He paused, his hand on the brass handle. He waited for the hesitation, for the sudden surge of regret. It didn't come. He opened the door, stepped out into the hallway, and let the heavy latch click shut behind him. It was a final, metallic sound, like a vault locking. He didn't look back. He walked toward the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, and watched the numbers count down, taking him away from the life of a man who no longer existed. The morning sun hit the Tribeca loft with a violence Elena wasn't used to. Usually the blinds were drawn to the perfect angle by 7 o'clock, filtering the harsh light into a soft, gallery-worthy glow. Today, the light was blinding, exposing dust motes dancing in the air that she had never noticed before. Elena sat up, shielding her eyes. "Lucas?" Her voice was thick with sleep, habitual and demanding. She waited for the familiar, soft reply, "Coffee's on the counter, L," but the penthouse answered back with a heavy, pressurized silence. It wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of stillness that rings in your ears. She threw off the duvet, annoyed. She walked barefoot into the living room, rehearsing a lecture about waking her up properly. The words died in her throat when she reached the kitchen island. The space was immaculate. No coffee machine humming, no smell of toast. Just the marble surface, cold and bare, except for the stack of documents and the simple gold band sitting atop them like a paperweight. She picked up the ring first. It was cold. She rolled it between her fingers, a strange mix of adrenaline and confusion spiking in her chest. Then she looked at the papers. Dissolution of marriage. Signed. Dated. Notarized with a stamp she didn't know he possessed. Elena laughed. It was a short, sharp sound that startled her. "You have got to be kidding me," she whispered, scanning the document. He hadn't asked for the apartment. He hadn't asked for spousal support. He hadn't asked for anything. He had simply cut himself out of the picture with surgical precision. She grabbed her phone and dialed his number. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." She pulled the phone away from her ear, staring at the screen. Lucas never turned his phone off. He was her emergency contact, her personal assistant, her safety net. A flush of anger rose up her neck. How dare he leave without a fight? Without the screaming match where she could list his failures and justify her own. But as the anger subsided, something else rushed in to fill the void. Relief. Intoxicating, terrifying relief. She didn't have to have the conversation. She didn't have to explain Julian. He had done the hard work for her. 30 minutes later, the front door buzzer rang. Julian walked in like he already owned the place, bringing with him the smell of rain and expensive cologne. He saw the papers on the counter and the look on Elena's face. "He knows?" Julian asked, tossing his wet jacket onto the pristine white sofa, something Lucas never would have done. "He's gone," Elena said, handing him a glass of champagne she had poured at 10 in the morning. "He signed everything. He left the ring. He's just gone." Julian grinned, that reckless, boyish grin that made her feel 22 again. He pulled her close, his hands wandering familiarly. "To the invisible man," he toasted, clinking his glass against hers. He finally did something interesting. They spent the day in bed, ignoring the world. It felt rebellious, electric, and free. But by evening, the reality of the apartment began to settle around them. The takeaway dinner arrived, and Julian left the empty cartons on the coffee table. When the sun went down, the apartment became strangely cold. Elena realized she didn't know how to program the complex thermostat system Lucas had installed. A light bulb in the hallway flickered and died, casting a shadow over the entryway. Elena stood by the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. Julian was in the shower, singing loudly, off-key. For the first time in 10 years, she was completely free. She had the man she wanted. She had the apartment. She had her career. She looked down at the coffee table cluttered with Julian's keys, his wallet, and the greasy takeout boxes. A tiny, irrational knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. The apartment felt different. It felt larger, colder, and less forgiving. She picked up Lucas's wedding band from the counter where she had left it. She intended to throw it in the trash, to be done with it. Instead, she opened the junk drawer in the kitchen, the only disorganized place in the house, and dropped the ring inside, burying it beneath old batteries and takeout menus. "Good riddance," she said aloud, testing the words. They sounded right. They almost sounded true. 5 years is enough time for a cell to replace itself completely. It is enough time for a city skyline to change, for a fortune to be lost, and for a man to kill the version of himself he hated. In Seattle, the rain was a constant gray curtain against the glass walls of the studio. It was 4:30 a.m. Lucas Bennett did not need an alarm clock anymore. He was already awake, finishing his 10-mile run along the waterfront, the cold Pacific air burning his lungs in a way he had grown to crave. He walked into his office, a converted warehouse in Pioneer Square. He stripped off his wet running gear, revealing a body that had been forged in the gym and starved of comfort. The softness of the New York landscape architect was gone, replaced by lean muscle and scar tissue. He showered in the office bathroom, dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than his old car, and poured a black coffee. He stood before the massive drafting table. The blueprints for The Sanctuary were spread out, a massive urban park project in Manhattan that was set to redefine his career. It wasn't just a park. It was a fortress of solitude in the middle of chaos. It was everything he wished he had built for himself years ago. His assistant, a young woman named Sarah, arrived at 7 a.m. She placed a stack of correspondence on his desk. "The New York committee is ecstatic," she said, eyeing him with a mixture of respect and trepidation. "They want to confirm your attendance for the gala next week. They still don't know you're the lead. They only know the firm name." "Tell them L. Bennett will be there," Lucas said, his voice low and gravelly. He didn't look up from the blueprints. "And book the flight. One way." 3,000 miles away, in New York, the morning was significantly less disciplined. Elena sat at her desk at the gallery, massaging her temples. The view of Chelsea was the same, but the reflection in the window showed a woman who looked tired. Not the fatigue of a hard day's work, but the exhaustion of carrying a dead weight. Her phone buzzed. It was a notification from American Express. "Transaction declined, $3,400 at the Sapphire Club." She closed her eyes and exhaled a shaky breath. Julian. 5 years ago, Julian had been the exciting, tortured artist who made her feel alive. Now he was a 38-year-old man who still talked about his potential while spending her money on bottle service and networking dinners that never led to sales. The passion had evaporated within 18 months, leaving behind the sticky residue of resentment. She picked up the phone and dialed him. "Baby," Julian answered, his voice groggy. It was 10 a.m. "I was just about to call you. I think there's a mistake with the card." "There's no mistake, Julian," Elena said, keeping her voice level. The other gallery assistants were within earshot. "It's maxed out. Again." "Come on, Elle. I met a collector last night. Big time. I had to pick up the tab. It's an investment." "You're an investment that isn't yielding any returns," she snapped, then lowered her voice immediately. "I have the commission meeting for the new city park project tonight. If I don't get this contract to curate the art installation, we are going to have to sell the Hamptons house." "Don't be dramatic," Julian sighed. "We're fine. You always worry too much. You used to be fun, you know?" The line went dead. Elena stared at the phone. She remembered Lucas. She remembered how he used to handle the bills, the taxes, the repairs, the dull mechanics of life so she could just be. She remembered how she had despised him for being boring. She looked at the invitation on her desk for the Architecture and Design Gala. The lead architect for the new city project was a mysterious figure from the West Coast named L. Bennett. If she could charm him, if she could secure the art contract for the park, she could stabilize their finances. She could fix the mess Julian had made. She didn't know that the solution to her problems and the source of her greatest regret were about to walk through the same door. The gala was held in the grand atrium of the Whitney Museum, a glass box of privilege floating above the meatpacking district. The air smelled of expensive lilies and ambition. Elena adjusted the strap of her black silk dress, her reflection in the darkened window showing a woman composed, sharp, and ready for war. She had come alone. Julian had a thing with a potential investor uptown, which Elena knew meant he was drinking at a dive bar with friends who borrowed money they never returned. She didn't care. Tonight was about business. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, smiling at donors she secretly loathed, accepting champagne flutes she didn't drink. The buzz in the room was centered on one thing: the Sanctuary Project. It was the most ambitious urban design commission in a decade, a massive green lung proposed for the Hudson Yards area. "I hear he's a recluse," a board member whispered to Elena near the stage. "From Seattle, brutalist style but with a lot of green, very intense." "Talent usually is," Elena replied smoothly, her eyes scanning the wings of the stage. She needed to corner L. Bennett the moment he stepped off the podium. She had her pitch rehearsed. The gallery represents the intersection of nature and modernity. The lights dimmed, drawing a hush over the crowd of 300. The spotlight hit the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host announced, his voice echoing off the high ceilings, "the vision behind the sanctuary. Please welcome from Bennett and Associates, Mr. Lucas Bennett." Elena's glass slipped in her hand, sloshing champagne onto her thumb. She froze. The name hung in the air, absurd and impossible. Lucas? Her Lucas? The man who used to apologize when she bumped into him? A figure walked out from the shadows of stage left. He moved with a stride Elena didn't recognize. Long, deliberate, predatory. He wore a tuxedo that fit him like armor, the fabric straining slightly against broad shoulders. His hair, once kept in a polite, office-friendly side part, was now shorter, textured, and silvering at the temples. A well-groomed beard defined a jawline she hadn't seen in 5 years. He stepped into the spotlight and adjusted the microphone. He didn't smile. He didn't look nervous. He looked out at the sea of faces with a cold, terrifying boredom. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. It was him. And yet, it wasn't him at all. "Good evening," Lucas said. The voice was the final blow. It was deeper, stripped of the hesitant cadence she remembered. It was the voice of a man who was used to being listened to. "We build walls to protect ourselves," Lucas began, his eyes sweeping the room. "But a city cannot survive on defense alone. The sanctuary is not an escape from New York. It is a mirror held up to it. It requires silence to appreciate the noise." Elena couldn't breathe. She stood near the back, hidden by the shadows of a sculpture, watching the man she had discarded like an outdated accessory hold the entire room in the palm of his hand. He spoke for 10 minutes. He commanded the space, using silence as effectively as words. There was no stutter, no deference. When he finished, he didn't wait for the applause to die down. He simply nodded once and walked off stage, indifferent to the adoration. The applause was thunderous. People were already moving toward the front, eager to get a piece of him. Elena remained rooted to the spot. Her rehearsed pitch about art and synergy evaporated. She wasn't looking at a potential client anymore. She was looking at the magnitude of her own mistake, standing 6 feet 2 inches tall and worth millions. She realized with a sickening lurch that she wasn't the protagonist of this story anymore. She was just a spectator in his. The rooftop terrace was cold, the wind whipping off the Hudson River, but the heat of the portable heaters and the press of bodies made the air stifle. Elena had downed 2 glasses of Pinot Noir in quick succession. She needed the alcohol to dull the sharp edges of her nerves. She watched him from across the bar. Lucas was holding a tumbler of mineral water, surrounded by a tight circle of investors and city council members. He wasn't the wallflower anymore. He was the gravity well. He listened more than he spoke, his head tilted slightly, an expression of focused intensity on his face that she used to mistake for passivity. Elena waited for a break in the circle. When a councilwoman stepped away to take a call, Elena made her move. She smoothed her dress, lifted her chin, and stepped into his line of sight. "Lucas," she said. Her voice wavered slightly, then she corrected it. "It's been a long time." He turned slowly. The conversation around him paused. The other men looked at Elena with mild curiosity, wondering who this woman was to interrupt the guest of honor. Lucas looked at her. Elena braced herself. She expected a flash of hurt. She expected the cold fire of anger. She even expected a smirk of vindication. She was prepared for him to cause a scene, to demand answers about the ring, about Julian, about the texts. Instead, his eyes were flat. They were the eyes of a man looking at a spreadsheet that didn't quite balance, mildly interested, but completely uninvested. "Elena," he said. His voice was even, stripping her name of any history. "I saw your name on the guest list. I trust the gallery is doing well?" The politeness was like a slap. It was the way you spoke to a former colleague you barely remembered from a conference 5 years ago. "The gallery is fine," she said, stepping closer, trying to force an intimacy that wasn't there. She lowered her voice. "Lucas, you look different. I almost didn't recognize you up there." "Time changes things," he said simply. He took a sip of his water. He didn't ask how she was. He didn't ask if she was happy. He didn't even look at her ring finger to see if she was remarried. "I wanted to talk to you about the project," she said, pivoting desperately to business because the personal door was welded shut. "The sanctuary. It's incredible. My gallery has a roster of sculptors who specialize in large-scale outdoor installations. I think you should speak to my project manager, David," Lucas interrupted gently. He gestured to a young man in a sharp suit standing 5 feet away. "He handles all vendor solicitations and artistic partnerships. I don't get involved in the granular details of procurement." Procurement. He had reduced her, his wife of 10 years, to a vendor, a line item. "Lucas, please," she hissed, her composure cracking. "Can we drop the act? It's me. Are we really going to pretend we're strangers?" Lucas looked at her then, really looked at her. For a second, she saw a flicker of something. Pity? Fatigue? It was gone as fast as it appeared. "I'm not pretending, Elena," he said softly, so only she could hear. "I'm working, and I have investors waiting." He didn't wait for her to respond. He turned his back to her, smoothly rejoining the conversation with the city councilman, laughing at a joke she hadn't heard. Elena stood there, the wind biting at her bare shoulders. She felt smaller than she ever had in her life. Anger would have meant he still cared. Hatred would have meant she still had power over him. But this polite, bureaucratic indifference, it meant she was already dead to him. She turned and walked toward the elevator, her heels clicking rapidly on the concrete pavers, fighting the urge to run. 2 weeks later, the reality of the contract required Elena to trade her stilettos for steel-toed boots. She stood amidst the controlled chaos of the construction site at Hudson Yards. The skeleton of the sanctuary was rising, a complex lattice of steel and sustainable timber that felt more like a cathedral than a park. The lighting angles for the sculpture, garden are off. A voice cut through the noise of a jackhammer. Elena turned to see Lucas walking toward her group. He wore a white hard hat and a high-visibility vest over his suit, yet he still managed to look like the most expensive thing in the zip code. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the schematics held by the site foreman. "If we position the sculptures where Mrs. Thorne suggests," Lucas said, using her married name with jarring ease, "the afternoon shadows from the vessel will obscure them by 3 p.m. The art will be invisible during peak foot traffic." Elena felt a flush of embarrassment. He was right. It was a rookie mistake, one she had made because she was too distracted by the overdue mortgage notices on her desk to check the solar pathing. "We can adjust the elevation," Elena suggested, trying to regain her footing. "Raise the plinths by 2 feet. Lucas finally looked at her. He didn't scoff, but his eyes held a clinical assessment. "That ruins the sightlines from the High Line." "No. We moved the installation 20 yards north. I've already cleared it with the landscape team." He had solved her problem before she even knew it existed. As the team moved to mark the new coordinates, Elena's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, shielding the screen from the glare. "Julian, 11:42 a.m. "Hey babe, the car guy says the transmission is shot. Says it's 4K to fix. Can you transfer? I'm stuck here." Elena stared at the message. $4,000. She didn't have it, not until the deposit for this project cleared. Julian was 38, standing in a mechanic's shop, asking her to bail him out again because he refused to lease a sensible car, insisting on driving a vintage Jaguar he couldn't afford to maintain. She looked up. Lucas was standing 10 feet away, discussing load-bearing tolerances with an engineer. He was calm, decisive, and utterly self-sufficient. He wasn't asking anyone for money. He wasn't creating emergencies. He was building a legacy. A memory hit her, a Tuesday night, 7 years ago. She had come home stressed about a gallery opening. Lucas had listened for 2 hours, then quietly organized her spreadsheet, made her dinner, and rubbed her feet. She had called him boring then. She had told her friends he lacked fire. She looked at the phone again. "Julian, hello? Elle? It's embarrassing standing here. This wasn't fire. This was arson." Julian was burning her life down, dollar by dollar, drama by drama. "Is there a problem, Mrs. Thorne?" Elena snapped her head up. Lucas was standing right in front of her. He had noticed her staring at her phone, frozen. "No," she lied, shoving the phone into her pocket. "Just coordinating the delivery." Lucas nodded, his face unreadable. "Good. We're on a tight schedule. I can't afford delays caused by external factors." He turned and walked away, pointing out a flaw in the concrete pouring, to the foreman. Elena stood alone in the middle of the dust and noise. The comparison was visceral. She had traded a man who built foundations for a man who dug holes. And the terrifying part was not just that Lucas was successful, it was that he was complete. He didn't need her. He didn't miss her. He had engineered a life where she was structurally unnecessary. She took her phone out and typed a reply to Julian. "Figure it out yourself." She hit send, but the victory felt hollow. She was still standing in Lucas's park, wearing a hard hat he required her to wear, hoping his check would clear in time to save her from the life she had chosen. The rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof of the site office, a relentless, drowning sound that matched the noise in Elena's head. It was 8 p.m. The site was empty, save for the single light burning in the portable office trailer at the edge of the lot. Elena didn't knock. She shoved the door open, bringing a gust of wind and water into the sterile, air-conditioned space. She was soaked, her hair plastered to her cheeks, her expensive coat ruined. She had walked 6 blocks from the subway station because her credit card had been declined for the Uber. Lucas was sitting at his desk, reviewing a 3D model on his monitor. He looked up, his expression shifting from concentration to mild surprise, but not alarm. He didn't stand up. "You're wet," he said. It was an observation, not a concern. "Why didn't you fight?" Elena demanded, the words tearing out of her throat. She didn't care about the contract anymore. She didn't care about the gallery. She was vibrating with 5 years of suppressed confusion. Lucas slowly took off his glasses and placed them on the desk. "Elena, you're hysterical. I'll call a car for you." "No." She slammed her hand down on his desk, scattering a stack of permits. "Don't you dare manage me. I want to know. 10 years, Lucas. We were married for 10 years, and you just vanished. You left a ring and a piece of paper. You didn't yell. You didn't throw things. You didn't even try to save us." She was crying now, hot tears mixing with the rain on her face. "Was I worth so little to you? Was it that easy to walk away?" Lucas looked at her hand on his desk, then up to her eyes. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. When he finally spoke, his voice was terrifyingly calm. It wasn't the voice of a victim. "I didn't leave because it was easy, Elena. I left because I was tired of being the only one fighting." He stood up then, walking around the desk. He didn't move toward her to comfort her. He moved to the window, looking out at the dark, skeletal structure of the park. "For 10 years, Lucas continued, his back to her. "I fought for your career. I fought for your happiness. I fought to make myself small enough so you could feel big. And when I saw that message on your phone, I realized something." He turned to face her. His face was a mask of absolute brutal honesty. "I realized you didn't cheat because you fell in love with Julian. You cheated because you didn't respect me enough to remain faithful. And you don't fight for respect, Elena. You either command it, or you leave." Elena took a step back, the wind knocked out of her. She had expected him to say he was heartbroken. She wanted him to say she broke him, but he wasn't broken. He was resolved. "I waited," she whispered, her voice trembling. "For months. I thought you'd come back. I thought you'd realize you made a mistake." "The mistake," Lucas said, "was staying as long as I did." He walked back to his chair and sat down, effectively dismissing her. He picked up his glasses. "I didn't fight for us, Elena, because there was no us left. There was just you and the audience you needed me to be, and I resigned from the role." He turned back to his screen, the blue light illuminating his face. "Go home to your husband, Elena. You won the prize you wanted. Try to enjoy it." Elena stood there for a long moment, shivering in her wet clothes. The truth hit her harder than any shout could have. He hadn't left to punish her. He hadn't left to teach her a lesson. He had left because she simply ceased to matter to him. She turned and walked out into the rain, the door clicking shut behind her. Inside the trailer, Lucas didn't look up. He zoomed in on the model, adjusting a structural beam by 2 millimeters, correcting the weakness in the design. Elena walked into the apartment, leaving a trail of rainwater on the hardwood floors. The penthouse was warm, smelling of stale takeout and expensive scented candles, a desperate attempt to mask the underlying scent of stagnation. Julian was on the sofa, watching television. He didn't turn his head when the door opened. "Did you get the deposit?" he called out, his eyes fixed on the screen. The mechanic called again. "They're threatening to charge storage fees." Elena stood in the entryway. She looked at the man she had destroyed her marriage for. She looked at the clutter on the table, the empty wine bottles, the careless sprawl of his limbs. For 5 years, she had told herself this was passion. Tonight, with the cold rain still clinging to her skin and Lucas's words echoing in her bones, she saw it for what it was. A bad investment she had been too proud to write off. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She felt a strange, cold calm settle over her, a shadow of the composure she had seen in Lucas's eyes. "Pack your bags, Julian," she said. Her voice was quiet, steady. Julian laughed, a short, disbelief scoff. He finally turned to look at her. "What? Babe, you're soaked. You're stressed. Come here, let me—" "I'm not stressed," she interrupted, walking to the kitchen island. She placed her hands on the cold marble, the exact spot where Lucas had left his ring 5 years ago. "I'm done. I want you out. Tonight." "You can't be serious." Julian stood up, his charm flickering into defensiveness. "Where am I supposed to go? We have a life here." "I have a life here," Elena corrected. "You have a host, and the host is dying. Get out, Julian, before I call the doorman to escort you." It took an hour. There was shouting, him, and silence, her. When the door finally clicked shut behind him, the silence that rushed back into the apartment wasn't the terrifying void she had felt 5 years ago. It was a clean slate. 3 months later. The sanctuary officially opened on a crisp Tuesday morning in October. The leaves on the newly planted maples were turning a brilliant, burning red against the gray steel of the Hudson Yards skyline. Elena walked along the winding gravel path. The park was a masterpiece of solitude in the middle of the noise. High walls of green, sound-dampening stone, and water features that drowned out the traffic. It was a physical manifestation of Lucas's soul, guarded, complex, and peaceful. She reached the central plaza. There was a small, understated plaque on the retaining wall, designed by L. Bennett and Associates. He wasn't there. The gala committee had told her he flew back to Seattle the night the project was certified complete. He hadn't said goodbye. He hadn't sent a note. He had finished the work and moved on to the next horizon. Elena sat on a wooden bench overlooking the water. She was alone. The gallery was struggling, but it was hers. The apartment was empty, but it was quiet. She pulled her coat tighter against the wind. She realized then that Lucas had signed the divorce papers twice. The first time was on paper, freeing him. The second time was that night in the trailer, freeing her from the delusion that she could ever undo the past. She traced the grain of the wood on the bench. It was sturdy, real. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty air. She didn't know if she was thanking him for the park or for finally teaching her how to be alone. She stood up, brushed the leaves from her coat, and walked back toward the city, ready to build something of her own.